I would like to examine the connections between Lot and the angels and Sodom and Gomorrah being brought into his house and the Passover meal. There are connections that I do not think most people pay attention to that are important to understand the story. So, if we take a look at the start of our situation, God appears to Abraham at the Oaks of Mamre. And you have to remember that in the Bible, divine appointments happen at trees. So you have the Oaks of Mamre here with Abraham and God and the two angels. Then you have another common one would be Moses and the burning bush. But not just there. You have Adam and Eve and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. All of these places where we have these trees, and Jesus is hung upon a tree. That the story moves forward at trees because divine interactions happen there. And when you see a tree, you have to ask yourself: is this important to the movement of the story? That some divine moment in history is happening here. And so I start here at this point in our story because Abraham invites God to join a meal with him. One of the reasons why you do this is because in the ancient Near East, in the culture there, that hospitality is incredibly important, and you are to be hospitable to the stranger around you. But one of the reasons why you would do that is because if you share a meal with somebody, then you have entered into like a sort of a peace deal, or you have entered into a promise of mutual benefit. And so if I was a king and I was threatening or in hopes of attacking another kingdom, I would not eat a meal with the other king, and I would not fall to the invitation to eat it. I would avoid eating the meal because then that would mean that I have agreed to peace. And so all of these interactions happen around meals for a reason. And so if we come down to our story here, God is about to leave, and then we are told this starting in 16 there in the red. Then the men set out from there and looked down upon Sodom, and Abraham went with them to send them on their way. Then Yahweh said, "Shall I conceal from Abraham what I'm going to do?" And God is beginning this process. Why this process of pulling Abraham in? Because God is trying to train Abraham what it is that righteousness does. And we know this because God continues the thought process there in the purple. Abraham will surely become a great and strong nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed on account of him. For I have chosen him, that he will command his children and his household after him, that they will keep the way of Yahweh to do righteousness and justice. And if you go to Micah chapter 6, around verse 8, is this question that Micah asks the people of Israel in terms of what is good, O man? And he has shown you what is good, to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with the Lord your God. And so God is pulling Abraham in because he is about to teach him what righteousness looks like. And so, then Abraham starts to respond to this invitation to engage in righteousness. And so we start here, continuing in the black. So that Yahweh may bring upon Abraham that which he said to him. Then Yahweh said, because the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, because their sin is very serious, I will go down and I will see. Have they done altogether according to its cry of distress, which has come to me? If not, I will know. And so God is communicating to Abraham that to do justice and righteousness means that when you hear the cry of the oppressed, you pay attention to the cry of the oppressed and you investigate. God already knows. But he has come to demonstrate to Abraham what righteousness looks like. And if you were going to be a nation that brings righteousness to the ends of the earth, then you are going to be the type of ruler that has to investigate cries of injustice. If you do not investigate those cries, then you are not being righteousness. Even if you know what the outcome is, you still do the investigation so that you can then clear the name of the person. Or in the process of doing the investigation, you come to find out that you didn't actually know, even though you thought you knew. How many times have we heard, oh, no, this person would never do something like that? And then it turns out that it is true, that they have been living an atrocious life for decades and hiding it from their closest friends. You do the investigation because this is what it means to do righteousness, that you listen to the cries of the oppressed and you find out, is oppression actually happening? Because if oppression is not happening, then you clear the name of the person, and you don't just have to say, I know that they wouldn't do it. You have done the work to clear the name. And if oppression is happening, then you can engage the process of deliverance, which is all throughout the Bible, that this is what we are crying for, that you are crying for your Redeemer to come to deliver you from the oppression that is around you. And so it ends there. If not, I will know. And then Abraham starts this back and forth, and he says, okay, wait a second. If you were going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, are you going to destroy the righteous at the same time? And God basically says, no, I will not destroy the righteous when I destroy the wicked. I will spare the city, because this is what Abraham is asking. Spare the city for the righteous. And God says, okay, I will spare the city for the righteous. And Yahweh says, okay, if there's 50 righteous in Sodom, in the midst of the city, then I will forgive the whole place for their sake. And then continues this bartering process, which is part of the Middle Eastern tradition. You never start with what you actually want. You always work your way there. And so then Abraham, he gets down here to 32, and he said, please, let not my Lord be angry, and I will speak only once more. What if 10 are found there? And he answered, I will not destroy it for the sake of the 10. Then Yahweh left as he finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. This is not the only place where God hears the cry of the oppressed, and he says, I will act. We get the same situation happening in Exodus chapter 3. Do you remember how Pharaoh, it says, a Pharaoh was arisen that did not know Joseph. And so then he sees the Israelites as potential enemies. And so then he says, let's kill all the sons so that they cannot rise up against us. And God hears about this oppression here. And so he has come down. And Moses sees the burning bush, and then he responds. And so we start here in verse 2. And the angel of the Yahweh appeared to Moses in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked, and there was the bush burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. And so once again, divine appointments are happening in the tree. You had Abraham interacting with God at the oaks of Mamre, and then that's where he finds out that Sarah is to be pregnant, and then a year later, Isaac will be born. Here we get, and then he tells Abraham that he's going to go find out what is happening in Sodom and judge Sodom for the injustice that is down there. And so then verse 5 here in the green, God said to him, you must not come near here. Take off your sandals from on your feet, because the place you are standing, it is holy ground. Wherever God shows up, that is holy ground. And so God showing up has made the ground holy. And so then you behave a certain way on holy ground that you do not necessarily need to behave on unholy ground. And so in the purple here, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face because he was afraid of looking at God. And Yahweh said, surely I have seen the misery of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry of distress because of their oppressors, for I know their sufferings, and I have come down. God himself has come down. He came down for Sodom and Gomorrah because he heard the cry of the oppressed, to teach Abraham what righteousness does. Righteousness investigates and listens to the cry of the oppressed. He has shown you, O man, what is good, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with the Lord your God. And once again here, he is teaching Moses what it means. I have heard the cry of my people, and I keep my promise, the promise to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so I have come down to deliver them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from the land to a good and wide land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. Now look, the cry of distress of the Israelites has come to me. And I also see the oppression which the Egyptians are oppressing them. And now come, and I will send you to Pharaoh, and you must bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. And so the cry of the oppressed in Sodom and Gomorrah. And what does God do to Sodom and Gomorrah? God has sent the angels down. And this is where we're going to pick back up where we had left Abraham. Chapter 19, and the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of Sodom. Then Lot saw them and stood up to meet them, and he bowed down with his face to the ground. And he said, behold, my lords, please turn aside into the house of your servant and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you can rise early and go on your way. And they said, no, but we will spend the night in the square. And so then this is also a common Middle Eastern thing. You make an offer, they refuse. You don't always, sometimes it is not nice to engage the first offer. You have to do the refusal so that they will then make the offer again. It could be considered politeness. And then verse 3 in the red there, but he urged them strongly, and they turned aside with him and came into his house, and he made a meal for them and baked unleavened bread. Remember I said that I wanted to pick up these connections between Sodom and Gomorrah and the Passover? Well, once again here we have unleavened bread. He baked unleavened bread for them, and they ate. Before they lay down, the men of Sodom, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man. And so then you get this common situation where the entire city came. You even see this in the stories and the parables of Jesus, where he's at Peter's mother-in-law's house, and he is healing people all through the night, and says all the city had come. So where Jesus takes and he inverts the situation, where the city of Sodom comes to oppress, and they have come to break down the house, to do their oppression. But Jesus, he is in a house of healing because he's healed Peter's mother-in-law's house, and all the people have found out that he has healed her. So they come to find out, and he casts out demons and he heals them all night long, and then he gets up early the next morning, right? So all the city came when Jesus was there, and he has reversed the situation where he has turned the oppression and set the oppressed free. And the angels have come down, and they also are going to set the oppressed free. They have heard the cry of the oppressed, and they have come down to investigate, to do God's justice. And so verse 4, or verse 5 here. And they called to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may know them. But Lot went out to them and to the entrance, and he shut the door behind him. And he shut the door behind him. This is also, this phrase shows up, and he shut the door, just like God shut the door on the ark, and it locked the oppressors out of the ark. Here, Lot has shut the door behind him and shut the oppressors out of his house. Lot's house has become the place of protection, and his hospitality is, because in the ancient Near East, if somebody has come under your roof, then they have come under your hospitality. And if they have come under your hospitality, that means they have come under your protection. Just like if the king were to eat that meal, then that would be a peace treaty, which could then very well also include that if somebody comes to war against you, then I will come to help you in war against them. That eating these meals are more than just eating these meals, that they are binding promises. So verse 7, and Lot said, no, my brothers, please do not do such a wrong thing. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, and then do to them as it seems good in your eyes. Only to these men do not do this thing, as it seems good in your eyes. This also is a phrase that you need to pay attention to, because it returns again and again throughout the Bible, just like Eve saw that it was good to eat. With her eyes, she saw that it was good to eat. With your eyes, you desire something, right? And so then you were to control your desires and not let them master you, just as God told Cain that sin is crouching at your door, is seeking to devour you. You are not to be consumed by the animal inside of you. You are to control the animal, just as God had told humanity that he says, I want you to rule and subdue creation. That means that you take the wild animal and you tame the wild animal. You are not to be a wild animal. You are to be a human made in the image of God. You are not to become like the animal. You are to become more and more like God, to become truly human. Control your eyes. Do not let your eyes control you. And so, but they're doing what is good, seems good in their eyes. Only to these men do not do this thing. And so Lot has gone too far, though, in his Middle Eastern hospitality and say that they are under my protection, because you would have to remember that you cannot sacrifice the protection of one thing for another thing type of thing. You're not going to sacrifice, you are not to sacrifice your daughters to protect these strangers, even though the Middle Eastern law of hospitality is calling you to protect them. You don't do that. But we see this law of hospitality as protection happening here, and Lot trying to fulfill that and failing at it. But they said, step aside. Then they said, this fellow came to dwell, is a foreigner, and he acts to judge. And now we shall do worse to you than them. And they pressed very hard against the man, against Lot, and they drew near to break the door. Then the men reached out with their hands and brought Lot into the house, and they shut the door. Once again, they shut the door. Just as the angels were to guard the entrance into the garden with their flaming swords, something very similar here is these angels now have turned the situation around. They were under Lot's protection, but because Lot had offered them protection, they now offer Lot the protection of God himself. Just as Jesus had turned the situation around where the people came to him and he brought them deliverance, whereas the enemies from the city come to bring oppression, the oppressed come to Jesus and find release. And so then the angels struck them with blindness, both small and great, and they were unable to find the entrance. Which also, Jesus has healed the blind man. And then he talks about being blind. And the Pharisees say, we are not blind, we see. And Jesus says, if you did see, then you would not be condemned. And, and then so he says, but because you claim to see, you are condemned. And so this judgment where it's right there in front of them, but they cannot see because they did not want to see. And so then they have become blind. What was good in their eyes, now they cannot see goodness at all because God has blinded them, because they refuse to see what was truly good. And so then basically now Lot finds out that they are the angels, for we are about to destroy this place in the green, because the cry of the oppressed has become great before Yahweh. Yahweh sent us to destroy it. And so then what we see here is that Lot sends to his family, and they think that Lot is being funny, that he is crazy, that he has lost his mind. And so then the angels tell Lot to take his family that is here, the two daughters and his wife, and leave. And Lot is hesitant. And so here in the green, the men seized him by the hand, and his wife's hand, and the two daughters by the hand, on account of the mercy of Yahweh upon God. So God has kept his promise to Abraham to not destroy the righteous with the wicked. And so he has brought Lot out. And then this bringing the oppressed out of the city, as the city is to be destroyed, is very similar to the situation that we find in the Passover. Remember, God says that he's about to judge the land of Egypt, just as God was about to judge Sodom and Gomorrah. And you have found the law of hospitality as coming under the protection of the roof, the owner of the roof of the house, and Lot finding his protection because he has offered hospitality that now is then returned to him. We get very similar sort of law of hospitality as protection happening with the Passover. And so the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, "This month is the head of the months. To you among the months of the year, it is the first for you." We find out that the month of Nisan now becomes the first month for them, because it is the start of a new creation for them. So it's a new year, and so then it signals this new creation, that they come out as a new people of God. They cross through the seas have been split, just as in creation God divided the waters above from the waters below. So 7 days, and then the 8th day is the start of a new creation. All of these types of things here, and so that you have this new month to signify all of these this liturgical calendar to help you to remember and to relive, to recapitulate what God has already done, and to then put yourself in that position as you observe the Passover again and again, to remember that God has done this in the past, he will do it again in the future. And so on the 10th day of the month, let each one of you take a sheep according to the ancestral households, each one take a sheep per household. But if those in the household are only a few, so that they are not enough for a whole sheep, he will bring in the nearest neighbor along with himself according to the number of the persons, each one a portion enough for him. Let it be reckoned with respect to the sheep. And so the Passover is going to be this meal that you are sharing, and you are going to come under the house and find the law of hospitality, of protection, coming into effect because you have shared this meal here. And this is not a meal of excess, but this is a meal of shared life together. And you then are to do it in such a way so that you have enough food for everybody, but not too much left over. And they will take some of the blood and place it upon the two doorposts and upon the lintel in the house, and which they may eat them. And this night they will eat the meat roasted by fire. They will eat it along with the unleavened bread, with bitter herbs. You shall not eat it raw, or even boil in water, but rather roasted by fire. The heads with the feet and the entrails, none of it shall be left behind until morning, and no bone from it shall be crushed, but you shall burn the parts left over from it in the fire until morning. And in the green, it is a Passover to the Lord. And I will go into the land of Egypt on this night, and I will strike every firstborn in the land of Egypt, human and animal, and I will render judgment upon all the gods of the Egyptians. I am the Lord. And the blood will be a sign for you upon the house in which you are dwelling. And I will observe the blood, and I will shelter you. And there will be no blow of destruction among you when I strike the land of Egypt. And so what we have here is this law of hospitality coming into effect again. And only this time, we see hints here that the roof that they are entering is not their house, but is the house of God. I say that because, and the blood will be a sign upon your houses in which you are dwelling. A sign of what? A sign that it is now a holy place. So if we, let me see about trying to get this opened up here. So I had to open up the note itself. What I wanted to do was to take a look at the blood. There's this old book from the early 2000s called Blood Ritual in the Hebrew Bible. And in the book, you find out here that finally, the same holds true for sacred space. Blood applied to doorposts or an altar functions to index territory within the sphere of holiness, thus mapping ordered space. The power of the blood is its ability to mark out ritual structure. So just as God told Moses to take off your sandals, for the place you are standing is holy ground, the blood is a sign to you that the house is now holy ground. And where is the house? The house is God's structure, because it is holy ground, because holy ground is the place where God is. And so when you come under the beams of that house marked with the blood, you have come under God's house. Why do I say that? Because if we take a look at Ezekiel chapter 45, talking about Passover and the festivals, and how do you go about consecrating the temple and all of those types of things, and says, "Thus says the Lord God, in the first month," what is the first month? The month of Nisan, right? Which is the month of Passover. "You shall take a bull from the herd without blemish and purify and sanctify. The priest shall take some of the blood of the purification offering and put it on the doorposts of the temple." So what have we done here? In Passover, we have done the same thing. We've taken the blood of the Passover sacrifice, and we have put it on the doorpost of the house, marking the house as holy, the same way that the temple of God is marked as holy, on the doorposts of the temple, marking it as God's house. The temple is referred to again and again as the house of the Lord, or the house of Yahweh. And so this is a sign to the people that the place is holy ground, the place where God dwells, and you are now sharing a meal with God. Do you remember how the Last Supper is a meal that is shared with Jesus? And he says, this is the blood of the new covenant, that you are now sharing a meal with God, and that you are now come under the protection of God. He says, I will shelter you. Whose shelter is it? It is God's shelter. And so when he says, I will strike the land of Egypt, if you are in God's shelter, if you are in holy ground, you have the ground of Egypt and you have holy ground. Those are two different places. And so when he strikes the land of Egypt, he is not striking the holy ground. He is striking the Egyptian ground. All the land of Egypt, just as he told Moses, for the place you are standing is holy ground. The house you are in is holy ground. And so you have come under God's protection. Just as God had the two angels pull Lot and his family out of Sodom and Gomorrah, God has pulled the people out of the land of Egypt by moving them into his realm, the holy realm. And so then he shelters them. They are now under his protection. Just like Lot had brought the angels into his house under the beams of his house. Do you remember when we read that in Genesis? And he's telling them, no, don't do this. They have come under the beams of my house. They have come under my shelter. I am sheltering them. They have come under my hospitality. They are under my protection. God tells the people, this will be a sign for you. You are now under my protection. And they are now in the land of the holy. The place they are dwelling is holy ground, just as God told Moses to take off your sandals, because the place on which you are standing, it is holy ground. Likewise, just as Lot has brought them into his shelter and he is sheltering them, they have shared unleavened bread. And I think there is a hyperlink here where God has written the Bible in such a way to draw our mind back to Sodom and Gomorrah. Just as Lot has given them unleavened bread, they are now eating unleavened bread and having a meal with God, and sharing this meal with God. And what do I say, sharing this meal with God? Whenever a sacrifice is sacrificed, when a human eats the sacrifice, if a human is to eat the sacrifice, it is always boiled meat. It is never roasted meat. The roasted meat is always God's portion, and the boiled meat is always man's portion. And so on the purification sacrifice, the purification offering shall be slaughtered before the Lord at the spot where the burnt offering is slaughtered. It is most holy. Verse 26. The priest who offers it as a purification offering shall eat it. And then we come down here to 28. A clay vessel in which it is boiled shall be broken. But if it is boiled in a bronze vessel, what happens to the rest of the sacrifice? It shall be burned with fire. God's portion is always burned or roasted. And man's portion is always boiled. And so if we take a look at the Passover here, we find out that you shall not eat it raw or even boiled in water. How are you to cook this Passover meal? You are to roast it. Green right here. And on that night they will eat the meat roasted by fire. They will eat it along with unleavened bread. Remember, Lot, unleavened bread, and they are not to boil it. And then you think of man's portion of sacrifice is always boiled. God's portion is roasted. So what is the blood doing? The blood is a sign to you on the doorposts that just like the blood goes on to the temple doorpost to mark the temple as holy, to sanctify it as holy, the blood goes on to the house of the person to mark it as holy, as God's house. You have come under God's dwelling place, and God's portion of the sacrificial meal is always roasted, and you are in the house eating roasted meal. This is God's portion that he is sharing with you. Why? Because you have come under God's protection. He says, I will shelter you. I will protect you from the destruction that is coming to the land of Egypt. Do you remember how Abraham asked God, will you destroy the righteous along with the unrighteous? And God said, no, I will not destroy the righteous along with the unrighteous. And so you have now found yourself under God's protection in his house, sharing a meal with God, God's meal given to you, which also comes to bring about this question that later in Deuteronomy, it goes to expand the point that we were talking about. You were to roast the Passover when you were in Egypt. Why? Because it is God's portion. You are in God's house under his protection. But later, when you remember the sacrifice, verse 6 here, but at the place where Jehovah, Yahweh, your God, shall choose to cause his name to dwell, there shalt sacrifice the Passover in the evening, as the sun went down, the appointment of thy coming out of Egypt, and boil thou and eat in the place which Yahweh thy God will choose. In Deuteronomy, when they were told to remember the Passover, they were told to boil the lamb. When they were in the Passover, they are told to roast it. Why? Because it is God's portion. But here, this is remembering, this is man's portion, because you are not in God's house at this moment, eating the meal with God. You were remembering God's protection. You're remembering God's promise, how God had given the promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that they would become a great nation. God has remembered his promise. This is what he told Moses when he says, I have come down because I have remembered the promise that I had given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I am sending you, Moses, because I am going to deliver my people. God has sent Moses, but it's God who has delivered the people because God is the one protecting them. He says, I will protect you. I will shelter you. You are going to sit in my house and enjoy this meal that I have prepared for you because it is roasted as opposed to boiled. And when you go read this in your translation, you probably will not see boiled. Instead, what you're probably going to see is cooked, because this brings about a question that is difficult to explain if you are paying attention. And so the English translators tend to just choose cook because the word boil can mean cook. But if we take a look at the word in this 12:19, where it talks about that you must not eat any of it raw or boiled in water. You were not to do this. So this is not boiled. This is not Bashan. And then if we come down here to Deuteronomy, let's just keep going through here. So Exodus 12, boiled. Exodus 16, boil. Exodus 23, boiled. 29, boil. 34, boil. Leviticus 6, boil. Deuteronomy 16:7, cook, and you shall cook it. Because it gets confusing that in Egypt, you were to roast it, but when you remember, you were to boil it. But in Egypt, you were told explicitly not to boil it. And so in English, it just makes it simple if we just say cook. But it's literally here, this says not boiled, boiled. Why? Because you are sharing the meal with God. You have come under God's protection. The Passover is God's hospitality given to us because we have come under his protection. We have shared a sacred meal with him. The blood on the doorpost has marked the house as holy. It is holy ground. It is no longer in the land of Egypt. It is now in a separate, sacred space. Just like the trees. The trees, when you met God at the burning bush, this was holy ground. This was sacred space. When you enter into the house with the blood on the doorpost, this is sacred space. Just as the blood is applied to the doorpost of the house, the blood is applied to the doorpost of the temple because it is sacred space. You have come under God's protection. So let's be a people that do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with the Lord our God, no longer living like the kingdom of darkness, but living like Christ in the kingdom of light, doing the things that Christ has done. We are to be a different type of people because we are a new creation. We have been brought out of Egypt to live as the people of God. So let's live as the people of God because God has shown us love. So let's show love to others.